Roelof is one of the leading AI visionaries and developers in Europe. He is the CEO and founder of both Creative AI and Sunshine Lab. Sunshine Lab builds products to help tackle the most pressing issue of our time, climate change. I first met Roelof at an event here in Bristol organised by Tiny Giant. You should all know them, they've done the AI cupcakes. And was delighted to discover he was not only a highly intelligent and thoughtful computer scientist, but also an anthropologist. So for me, he's the future, technology fused with a deep human understanding. In his talk, Roelof will explore how, in these unsettling times, do we move beyond the current crisis and commit ourselves to a more equitable world? Anthropologists and engineers are uniquely positioned to help, and Roelof will explain why.
Thank you. Great, hello everyone. Let me just switch over to my slides. So that AI visionary is not something I came up with, but would be, of course, a little bit too blatant. And today I'm actually not really going to tell much about AI for change, but more about my adventure away from AI. Thanks, Gloria, also for not having too many slides, because I make up for it with having plenty of slides. So this will be a whirlwind tour to some of my last months of kind of investigating what it means to be both an anthropologist and an engineer in times of climate change, and kind of thinking around what purely my personal role could be in what I feel comfortable with and maybe makes me a bit more happy, instead of only focusing on the desperation we find ourselves in. So we all have seen maybe this planet of the Earth, right? The Earth we live on. This is kind of what it has come to look more like in the most recent years. We've heard a lot about climate change, global warming, the ice caps are melting, etc., etc. So very shortly, before we dive into the horror, something about myself. The twirly line means that I've always walked a little bit between anthropology and computer science. So I'm originally educated as a computer scientist, University of Amsterdam, after which I did my graduate studies in Leiden, then Amsterdam, and then Stockholm in anthropology, in cultural anthropology, social anthropology, and development sociology, where I then also did some years of development work in Ghana. Afterwards, I found myself very much involved in the startup scene, being able to combine both my anthropological work with also being able to pay my rent. Worked at KTH University, then found out that neural networks can also be used for creative things. This is kind of where my most recent work was on, kind of trying to find ways how we can use AI in more interesting, creative ways with creative AI. But now moved to Foundation. I founded Sunshine Lab, where we work, as Dan also mentioned, on sustainable product development. So this is kind of those circles. So that's enough about me. So one of the things that I think, in my opinion, maybe not so many people touch upon when we talk about climate change or ecological disaster or whatever it's all happening, is the kind of inverse relation between the kind of, if you would want to put the blame somewhere, right? Those industrial nations of the world having had the biggest impact on greenhouse emissions, mostly global north, which you see to the right, so all the red areas. And those who will be the most harshly affected by climate change, which is generally speaking the global south, right? Which is to the left image. And this means that we, as more industrialized nations, let's call it like that, or global north, have also, I think, a larger responsibility for our fuck-ups to make them right, but also in stand in solidarity with those places where our help is the most needed, right? And so we look at the carbon dioxide concentration growing, we look at temperatures increasing, but then, we have the choice. What do we want to do about this, right? We have amazing technology, we have amazing things we can do. So we have some possible projections from the IPCC, right? So on the one hand, we have our current policies, which definitely take us around 4.75 degrees Celsius, which is, well, the end, at least, of the way of living as we know it, and of many of the world's inhabitants. We have pledges and targets, which are a little bit better, but then we also have the reality of what is actually going on, which is even worse, where we actually then have to go much more down to maybe, let's say, 1.5 degrees, which is still not very nice. There will be still kind of a lot of troubles we won't dive into. But that's kind of what we should be doing, right? We're not really doing it, but we all know we should be. And what makes it even worse is that we actually don't really know a lot about the problems. We know actually quite a lot about what we can do, about the solutions, luckily. So that's the good news. There is a lot of things happening which we can be doing. We don't really know much about the actual complexities of this world system, right? With all the kind of tipping points it has, what we see here. So these are kind of the different kinds of things within the world system which have impact on each other. We see with 1 degree, 3 degrees, more than 5 degrees, kind of what are the major impacts. Fields which have tipping points. We don't really know where they lie or where they are, but they might be just setting us up. Any of those could kind of get us into a kind of cliff. And then, so that's at the climate. There's a lot of things we could be doing. There's a lot of things we should be doing. But look at another field, right? This is the tube I took from London. So we have all this kind of nice, like Londoners love to put signs everywhere about watch out and risk this and risk that. And people pay attention to this. Do not take any risks if you go into a car. Of course, you put your seatbelt on, because even if it's less than 1% chance you get into a crash, it's just common sense, right? You put your seatbelt on the same way you go into a plane. You hear, this and this happens if we crash. But somehow, if we talk at like the really big major, extinction level events, we think, IPCC type things. Let's go for 50% chance of, not having horrific scenarios, 1.5 degrees. And in the latest IPCC report, we talk about 66% chance. So we kind of know what we should be doing to get a 66% chance of success, right? And also as a computer scientist, I don't think this is, very much satisfying. So this means that if you really want to get to a bigger chance of doing something, let's say we have a 90% chance of getting towards 1.5 degrees warming, we have what we see here is the carbon budgets. We have maybe 4 years left to get there, right? That's not much time to drastically change the world we live in. So that's the reality. So that's the doom. But luckily, it's not all gloom. There is also some hope. So let me take you, and thank you for all sitting through this silently. Hope you're not all disparaged. But there's also a lot of hope, right? There's a lot of solutions happening. There's things like Drawdown, who have, project of scientists, like hundreds of scientists around the world, working together, different solutions for climate change. There's different continuations of this. So we have a pretty good understanding of the kind of things and actions we could be taking on the policy level. Refrigeration, turns out, is a major impact, like all the kind of toxicities in there. We also have amazing, this is kind of the singularity type, which you normally would hear in kind of tech events. We have amazing breakthroughs in technology. We have drinking water from the sun and the air. This is already operational in Texas and other places. We have new types of materials, graphene, which can be made for new type of solar panels, which can work even at kind of cloudy weather. And then especially in battery technology, we have not only more sustainable batteries, right, which are not having all kind of nasty materials in there, but we also have batteries that are generally cheaper to produce and kind of solve the problem we have with renewable energy. So the remainder of my talk will be very much focused on my passion, which is renewable energy, and the kind of strides we've made there. And so there's two things that are happening. On the one hand, renewable energy is getting cheaper, right? So we can see here to the right image, we see already kind of reached what is called grid parity, right? So we have the point that actually renewable energy is the cheapest source of energy, like period, even compared to nuclear or any kind of other source. And that's amazing. So anything new we build, we can do from renewables, and it's, even in, neoliberal market capitalist economies we're living with, that's just good business. Then we also have climate change litigation. So even if governments might not be really acting as much, like in Holland where I'm from, there's like court cases going on for the last 6 years against the government, forcing them to kind of basically do what they've promised to do, which is getting around to 50% reduction by 2030. And the government is appealing this, and so are many other governments, like the British government has been doing the same. But there is some progress being made, with court cases being won, and I know Ireland has made quite big news about wanting to go around 50% climate neutral 2030 or something like this. So that's great. So all over the world, people are doing these things. We have also seen climate strikes happening just some weeks ago, with 7 million plus all over the globe, protesting for a better world. And I think that's very hopeful, right? So we might not have much time, but there are really a lot of things happening. And also further in the UK, if we look at kind of what is happening with energy, climate, we can see like this is kind of what is being built, and I'll skip very quickly through it. But here you can see, especially on the level of 2016, you see a lot of more action happening. Like a lot of the coal plant, like some of the coal things are being decommissioned. There's much more solar plants being built, wind energy is being planned, etc. And so this is then the future projections, right, which the British government has announced. And we can see to the left, we can see this massive green line going up. That's the planned wind farms the UK is planning. We'll see, how much of that is actually becoming a reality. But it is pretty hopeful. Some other news last week, I think. It's a Nottinghamshire coal-fueled station being shut down. So bye-bye. We had 6 coal plants, UK, 5 more to go. So anybody who's interested in doing a bit more marching, here's some action points. So that's hopeful, right? So there is, again, things going on. But what then, where we talked earlier about this point, which Don also mentioned, about equity, what does it mean when we have an increased responsibility towards many other places in the world as well, where the resources are less? We have about, well, now it's around 800 million people without any access to electricity. There's still around 2 billion plus people with limited access to electricity. And that means around 30% of the world population doesn't have reasonable access to electricity. And that's one problem, right? It makes it also hard to tackle these challenges. Next to that, access is often unequal. So to the left, we have urban areas. To the right, we have the same counties, but the rural areas. So we can see that it has been relatively okay to electrify urban areas, but the kind of most inaccessible places to reach, they're becoming increasingly so it becomes increasingly more difficult to reach kind of the last mile, if you want to call it like that, of electrification. It's also rather expensive to have access. So you might have a grid connection, right? You might be connected to the grid, but it might cost you up to 40-50% of your income, which is a lot, right? Then it's also rather unreliable. So the number of disruptions per week you can see here. So that means that on average, most places, even if you're connected to the grid, you have like at least a couple of power outages a week. So you still need backup generators if you have hospitals or whatnot. So this takes a lot of effort for existing infrastructure, where then renewable energy can really make this move. Because the beautiful thing about renewable energy is that you, in the case of wind and solar, you can actually produce the energy where it's also consumed. And this is then also the biggest risk to kind of the current big energy companies, right? We will have more interest in a model that is centralized and can able to move us towards what they call the energy transition, right? Which is a nice way of moving us through these times. What do people really want with electricity? So this is a survey done by the World Bank. Mobile charging is one big thing. Of course, people skipped the telephone lines and went straight to mobile phones, which is great. So people want to be able to charge their mobiles. And there's a lot of things happening on this area, right? So there's a lot of companies, startups, etc., working in mostly a lot of sub-Saharan Africa, especially, and working on this field. Although mostly filled with cheap Chinese electronics, so maybe in 4 or 5 years, these things will wither away with all kind of other environmental problems attached to it. We have all kind of reports, saying, okay, there's so much stuff going on. We have so much market opportunities, investment, new markets. We can add stacked services, so we can integrate people into the banking system, etc. So, okay, we have mobile charging kind of getting there, right? We have so many startups there. And that's amazing. I think don't try to dismay this and say this is bad. I'm saying that, this is step one. This is amazing, and we should do only more of this. But it's only step one if we really want to go to the rest. So, so here we see some Nomad Kit in Mogadishu, for instance, placing one of the solar panels, 50 watt, for their family. So this is kind of the situation which mostly looks like. And then these are the kind of services that are still inaccessible with that, right? So especially refrigeration is one major need if you're like a farmer and you have your produce from the land and you want to be able to sell it on the market. Like refrigeration is very important, the same for if you have meat or whatever. So that's kind of one of the main things. So this is the kind of things that people then really want. So that was kind of, after a lot of analysis on talking to people and doing a little bit of field work and stuff, we set ourselves also with Sunshine Lab. We thought, okay, let's try to see what is possible, cheaply, accessible, off-grid, scalable, on the level that people can at least run refrigeration from renewable sources, right? And if then most companies are not really, well, that's actually not really true. It's actually that there is now companies really doing this more, but let's pretend that it's not. It's still a lot of help needed. So then if no one else will, let's do it yourself. So let's try to empower communities to be able to do this by themselves, right? It is, if you're a startupper like me, I've run quite some AI startups, the question is always, how do we scale things? We want to top-down scale things, but the best way to scale is just run things locally, like little flowers which you pop up, and people can scale it themselves further, right? They build their businesses on top of that, and it's the most scalable thing you have, and you can see that with climate strikes and Extinction Rebellion. That's a scalable model of protest, right? People doing their things everywhere around the world, and that can be done for basically anything. Anyone recognizes this? Anybody knows what this is? So this is what some of the 60s, 70s kids would be having on their, like if I would be a little bit older, I would have this definitely on my wall. This is the Apple II schematic. And for until the 60s, 70s onwards, it was actually really, really normal to have, when you would buy consumer electronics, to have the schematics attached to it, because it would be logical that you would want to repair your products. It would be easy to understand what is in it. You would want to upgrade your electronics, etc. So that was kind of the normal way of doing business. Then, not so much anymore, right? So currently we go from we're talking about the circular model, but at the same time, more and more on kind of the, let's say when we talk about our consumer electronics or products, we're moving more and more away from the circular-is model, which we actually used to have in the 60s, 70s, which mainly was fueled by 80s, 90s. Moore's law kicked in, computers became like smaller, but also became faster with bigger memory. And this meant that new machines all the time had to be produced, and that meant that it also, together with that, in 2000s, mostly software was being made. Moore's law broke down, so it's kind of where we are now. So the main incentive was to produce more and more software, which made it possible for a lot of these companies which made themselves really big, like Apple, for instance, starting as an open model, closing it down more and more, to have a business incentive to close things down, right? To be able to make a lot of money of that. And you can see that the same with 2000s, mobile phones, etc., coming in, which are completely closed, right? You can't do anything with them. There's even a lot of laws in place, especially in the US, where you're not even allowed to touch the hardware you buy. So you buy a product and you actually go to court if you dare to open it, right? This is a pretty crazy thing. Like if you buy a product, you should be able to do with it whatever you want, right? And the most crazy example, well, it's a lovely, like the designer in me speaks like, wow, this is beautiful. Anyone has these AirPods? They're amazing, right? They're like amazingly designed, they're small, they're beautiful, but they're also really, really nasty for the environment. So they're like the most horrible product designed ever for the environment. You can't repair them. You can't open them almost not open them without being able to damage the battery. This is kind of what it looks inside, but if you look what happens when you drive over it, there goes your AirPod. So that's what you have next to your ear, right? There's health effects attached to it. There's been some medical studies done, what these things actually cause to your brain, which are not really good. I mean, if you want, like there's a Q&A if you want to ask more questions, but it's pretty nasty stuff. And it's very closed. And it's also completely unrecyclable, whatever Apple might say about it. And so it means you can't really reuse it, you can't recycle it. So, and this is just, I mean, there's plenty of examples to choose from, unfortunately. But there's a good website where you can actually, if you want to know what your products consist of and what heavy metals are in there or whatever, you can go to Design Life Cycle. And this is also growing awareness, right? There's more and more people trying to upskill things. So one problem there is then when we also look at more sustainable solutions, right? You have e-scooters where you can say, okay, it's a bit of a disaster for the public space, but at least they're clean and nice and renewable. The problem is with these kind of e-scooters, they have to run at least 1,000 miles before they even get all of their carbon and whatever pollution out, right? So after that, they would be kind of positive for the environment. No single scooter will make that, right? They're already, because they're mostly all the same Xiaomi scooters from China. Next to that, they're very hackable, exactly because, again, these scooters are also closed, so you can't really look in there or whatever. It means also that because you close things, it's not open for inspection, means it's really not secure, right? Or you don't know if it's secure. It turns out it's not secure, right? I have an app some researcher friend made from MIT, which lets me control any scooter, right? So I can, when a scooter is driving in front of the red light, I can stop the scooter and say, haha, you cannot go to green. Or the opposite, right? When it's green or when it turns red and the scooter wants to stop, I can say, sorry, like your brake is not working. That's pretty, it's one thing if you do this with software, right? When software fails, and AI is one example of that. We have all kind of troubles with AI. Now, imagine this kind of things we do with AI and facial recognition and all the things we think about it, and we have the same kind of challenges in our products, right? Which we use, and even in our cars or whatever. So what then to do? And this is just some preliminary, let's say, principles, design principles, which I bumped into when I started to kind of try to design renewable products for the global south markets, where I started asking myself, okay, what are kind of principles, at least which lets us think around these things? And it doesn't mean that we immediately have to have the solution, right? Iterative development and design is also a good thing, but at least we have to be very much aware about these things. So first of all, of course, is it open, right? And we have good licenses for this, both for software and hardware. For software, we have Creative Commons, which lets you choose which of the open source things you find important. So the four freedoms of open source. We have the freedom to run a program however you want. You have the freedom to open it and study it and learn from it. You have the freedom to help your neighbor with it. And then you also have the freedom to distribute it and share it, right? Which means also economical, and this is something where many of my hacker friends would disagree with. The economical freedom, I think, is a very important freedom there. Be able to have sustainable business. So I don't think you can have like actual sustainability with also economical independence, being able to run your businesses on top of open models, right? So those are the four, and we have the same for hardware standards, which is the kind of stuff which you then need not just for the software you run on your product, but also the boards, the PCB boards that are created. There's some things which cannot really be caught yet with open standards, like supply chains, right? It's an important thing about producing things. But that's at least it's a start, right? So is it open? And we know Linux. We have the internet, which actually was open source, right? The fact that when HTTP was developed and it was decided to put in the public domain, made it possible actually to develop internet as it is right now. Otherwise, we wouldn't even have the internet. It's the same for most of the internet infrastructure, the backend infrastructure, the routers, all of these things are open. Example of this is the Linksys router, where Linksys actually wanted, most of the products are closed, right? So this is a router that was kind of like closed by obfuscation, saying, okay, it's closed, but actually it's not, because they still use, like most companies, like Apple also, started from Linux, essentially. So they run Linux on it, and some German hackers found out that it was running Linux, and so they kind of hacked it around and started building things on top of this router. And that meant that you could buy like $100 router, which had the capabilities of like professional $1,000 routers, which then also could be developed for providing internet in Global South and etc., which is exactly what people started to do. So if you're an engineer, David Rao, who started building telephony, so internet telephony, which has been rolled out over many, many African countries, very cheaply, for $50, you can have this router, and it provides basically internet. Other things is that you can actually make, there's some stuff I've been working with, like make it very easily to produce your own solar panels. Still nasty materials, there's some graphene 3D printable stuff coming, but solar panels are inherently nasty, toxic material waste products. But this is a completely open product, so you can actually buy all the hardware to create your own solar panels. It's just all online on the internet. We have like solar charge controllers. We have like, I'll skip a little bit through all of this, but we have all kind of open source small projects people are doing or building companies on, open source monitoring. We have people building whole farm kits for reinstating civilization if it would fall. So these are all kind of materials. But also, of course, when things are not open, we have all kind of ways to open them up, right? We have Sci-Hub for the paywalls in academia. We have Pirate Bay for whatever wall in software. But also the same kind of technologies then used just to share, right? So we can share. This is academic torrents, used a lot by AI enthusiasts like me to share data sets, really open data sets. And then also for hardware, we have a little bit more hidden companies, which is called IC crack companies, where you can actually take a chip, which is closed, and closed is mostly done just purely on the hardware level with silicon. And they will basically, for $50, they will open it up for you, and you can inspect it under the microscope what is in there, and reverse engineer whatever people have made. So second principle, 5 minutes left, so I'll really skip quickly through it. Can you make it easy to start with? So we have Arduinos, which let you really, and this most focus on hardware, right? It's going to be Arduinos. We have the 3D printing revolution happening, right? So we have 3D printers which were made possible by open sourcing it and early adopters who kind of knew their stuff, starting with it until it became simpler and simpler and simpler. Now you can just buy a 3D printer to print your own stuff. Using 3D printers to create 3D printers, wrap projects. Third principle, can we keep it simple, right? Can we do things like Schumacher, small is beautiful, or people like Michigan Tech, creating things like microscopes, which to the left. Then we have pipettes and vacuum pumps for about $1 each. So these are kind of simple things we can completely 3D print and use some household things. Small water pumps in my kitchens. Through things like barrels, which let you, just get water across the field with also a small battery in there to be able to pump the water. Fourth principle, can we make it together? Which is really much helped by the proliferation of makerspaces, fab labs, started by MIT lab stuff. So these are kind of like subscription models, like a gym membership you can go to. And there's plenty of them around also in Bristol and in London, and they let you kind of make things. So they have these kind of materials in there, from 3D printers to CNC machines. And you might think, okay, that's nice, like how big can this be? It's pretty big, right? So this is all the places where you can essentially go completely, almost for free to one of these places, and you have like a mini factory where you can not only make things, but also be part of a community to then make things together, learn, etc. So this was my tour into hardware, right? I'm not originally a hardware guy, so my last 3 months I spent just like learning from people teaching me with all these kind of things. 5, can we be thoughtful, right? So this I'll skip a little bit, going back to like the earliest pre-internet type sharing things, which are mostly done through catalogs, the whole Earth catalog, but also things, which is a very nice term, I think, life-centric. Can we go beyond the user? And I know Kira will touch on this as well, I think. So can we move beyond the user-centric thing, where it's almost like we're selling drugs, like user and hits and whatever, to something that not only takes people into account, people-centric, but also takes the ecology and the Earth into account, which also goes back to Christopher Alexander, like something we worked a lot with, these kind of principles. Fairphone is one of the products that has all of these things in it. So that's a phone where people have tried to say, if we really want the best type of thing, which is kind of renewable and nice and respectful and recyclable as a phone, can we build it? Turns out you can't, but you can get there maybe 70, 80%, right? So that's what they're trying to get better and better in. Example from Holland is also Tony Chocoloni's, which became famous, which is people where someone said, okay, we can't really create nice labor respecting chocolate because it's mostly child labor, and it still is. So let's create chocolate the best way we can from the best kind of labor, but also know that it's not really great. And then just sue myself that I say, oh, sorry, I knowingly know that I employ child labor. And so you had to go to Dutch court and whatever. So that's a good thing. Is a modular, so can we build little things which you recombine and remix in different ways, like IKEA furniture or this kind of 3D printed stuff, that we can maximally reuse what's there, but only really need what we use. So we don't really take into account the things we then don't use. Used a lot for hardware, kind of interesting machines that can do many different kind of things with the same hardware. Can we produce it locally? Company based here in London, for instance, OpenDesk does that for furniture. So this is ripped from them, where we say, okay, can we go from the industrial model, from mass production, mass logistics, all of these sources and movements and transport, to a model where instead of shipping products, we ship digital designs, right? And then we produce them locally, because designs can be available anywhere. So the only thing we really need is a local makerspace. So that's kind of what that model looks like. And there's many websites that can help with that, from GitHub for Code, for places to find 3D models or other models or CAD models. So my time is up. So the last one, can we reuse it? So we can 3D print, we can reuse 3D print, which is amazing. Is it affordable? So these are kind of $100. Wind turbines and water turbines with completely open source. People can recreate easily. Same for this. Even simpler, which then goes from lower cost to more sustainability. And then the last one, does it empower the community? Right? So is there kind of a way for the community to get involved in this, that they're actually, with all these kind of tools and equipped, that we stand in service of local communities and help them kind of create what is the best for their place. So things like open Wi-Fi, citizen science, where people create their own sensor kits, cheaply sensors for air quality monitoring. And then does it do AI, of course, since we're a lot of talk about AI. No, it doesn't. That's a talk for another time. But let me just end with this quote then. that there's no computer models, no satellites, no radars, no hockey stick graphs that can help us chart out of our way towards the kind of civilization we originally need to build. We have to do that work together. And then I end with an announcement. So these are, again, the last, again, for people interested in this, there's an upcoming blog post which goes more into detail with this as well. I'll skip my own household experiments where you see kind of crazy building things, but I just skip to the announcements. So there's just things building, and you can see some mess in my my garden, etc. Actually welding everything from a battery, etc. Blah blah. But let me skip to the announcement. Some prototypes we're building with where it's a modular. And then using this to kind of grade where we are on these principles, right? Saying, okay, this is kind of where we are, where we want to be. So that's kind of how these things, they're pragmatic principles. Like, no way in hell we can get 100% on all these principles, but we should try, right? So there's a website, Green Solutions, where all these models will live open source. People can remix them, reuse them, build communities around them, completely open and free. And then we also, tomorrow, there is a kind of a mingle, a get-together, climate on conference for anybody who wants to talk more about this. 9 till 3 or whatever talk. So greensolutions.cc stands for Creative Commons. You can sign up and we'll let you know where it will be. But that's it.